All right. So day 3 of the conference, I'm starting to lose my voice a bit, so bear with me. And I thought that as a security person in a security session, I would start talking about ARPU. So we've been talking for as long as I can remember, being in this industry, from a CSP standpoint. How do we increase ARPU, so the revenue per user? Not super successfully so far, from what we can see, at least when we look at the data from Europe, for example, where the mobile ARPU has been falling. In fixed, it's been more or less plateauing. And of course, the usage in terms of data has been skyrocketing. So that's kind of like an interesting situation to be in. But I found, when I was looking around, I found someone who managed to do it. So they have an ARPU with the most popular residential plan at $150 per month. So something is going right, at least for that particular provider. Looks pretty sustainable. So if they can manage to do that for their most popular plan, something must be going right for them, at least. Only, it's not really a CSP, or at least not in the traditional sense. It is a proxy service provider. There are many such providers that you can find, by Googling or by hanging out on some of the black hat forums. This particular one is Proxy. There are hundreds like this, where you can basically buy access to a network of proxy addresses, whether it is from mobile networks, fixed broadband networks, even data centers, although there's a bit less interest in that. But there are a lot of such providers, and they make very bold claims in terms of the number of IP addresses that they can provide access to. So depending on the specific provider, they range anywhere from the low tens of thousands to the hundreds of millions of residential IP addresses that they can lease to third parties. Many of them are cryptocurrency friendly, and they encourage the use of crypto. Some of them, and those are the more interesting ones, and I will explain a bit why later, are only cryptocurrency. So there is some understanding of pseudo-anonymity when it comes to those types of transactions to basically lease the IP addresses of, for the most part, unsuspecting residential broadband users. So I think when we talk about proxies, and residential proxies in particular, it's important to remember that there are many different possible use cases for using proxies, such as the one I described. Some of them will be legitimate, or at least what most people would judge as legitimate use cases, like monitoring the pricing of your competitor. For example, when you're a hotel chain or an airline, a lot of them will be using this type of proxy services to simulate what is the pricing that specific customers in this particular country or town are seeing when they look at the pricing for a hotel room or for a particular route on this airline. Some of them will be also for ad companies, or at least the people who buy ads on Google and Facebook and the likes, to verify that the ads are performing as expected, especially in the market that they are specifically targeting. So that's, let's say, for the more legitimate side of things. Now, of course, there is a little bit of the middle ground there. Also, there are some use cases, and especially since last year, there has been a lot more marketing messaging for those proxy providers to give access to websites, especially when it comes to LLM, so for all the Gen AI crawling and scraping of websites. I think there is legitimately some debate about whether that's a gray area or not. There is also, of course, all the scalping issues that, for example, some people use to buy event tickets with Ticketmaster for Taylor Swift concerts, but also, and surprisingly to me at least initially, to buy sneakers. So limited edition sneakers, proxies, apparently a great use for that, and dedicated messaging as well. And then there is the definitely not legitimate at all use of those proxies, which is around DDoS, which is, of course, what I will be focusing on for the rest of the presentation. which we have seen a lot of threat actors use as a way to obfuscate their real locations, and especially when it comes to activist-driven DDoS. And I will also give you some more concrete examples about how that allows them to really bypass any type of GeoIP blocks, which we have been using for a while. And that will be a bit out of scope for this particular presentation, but of course, a lot of those proxies will be used for other types of cybercrime, whether it is to do some credential stuffing, password spraying, spam, phishing, and all the likes. So when we look at the types of providers, same as what we saw for the use cases, there is a broad range of different providers. Many of them, by the way, are related. So if you look a bit in the chains of the cryptocurrency wallets, many of them are related. The legal entities, when they have some, also related. But let's say we can distinguish between different types of providers. On the left, those that will have some amount of processes in order to deal with abuse, with trust. So typically, for example, Bright Data, Oxy Labs, so those will be mostly used by, for those type of competitive monitoring type of use case. They have some amount of processes to know your customer. So they will check when someone is subscribing to the service before they provide access. They will check also the payment method. Generally, you can't just use crypto as a first way to access the service. So there will be some amount of protection, at least to gatekeep the access to those proxies. On the far right here, of course, there are other types of providers which are far less scrupulous. And those will be more likely to advertise, for example, on some of the forums like Black Hat and others. On Telegram, of course, which has been a really active source of, really active marketplace of proxy and other cybercrime tools. And of course, as a consequence, they will be much more likely to be targeted by law enforcement. So we have seen, in the past couple of years, some takedowns of some of those botnets, some of those proxy networks that I mentioned here. So for example, the 911 S5 is a new iteration of one that was taken down by law enforcement a couple of years ago. But yeah, in this space on the right, it will be mostly, it will be a bit of a, anything goes type of territory, but also with what comes with that territory. So more likely attention from law enforcement. And then in the middle, we have everything else, right? So we have some of those providers that don't really check on who is actually using their service. We often have a mix of potentially legitimate, but also potentially cybercriminal traffic. And as I said, many of them have wholesale partnerships, agreements between them when they don't belong to the same company altogether. So as a DDoS attacker, that's exactly where you want to be. So this is, for this type of providers where you have some good traffic, some bad, you're not really attracting too much attention from law enforcement. So this is what many of them end up using, right, from this a couple of different companies. And again, this is just a small subset of all the providers out there. When you look at these websites, on how they market those services, many of them, and that's just one screenshot across many such similar providers, claim that they have 100% ethically sourced proxy IPs. And by that, of course, they don't provide a lot of details. So they claim that they have the user consent, so the owner of the IP address that they source and that they lease. Apparently, they have their consent. In reality, what ends up happening is that there is proxyware that is included in some SDK in some different applications. The user has to scroll past a long EULA and then just doesn't read it and checks the box, and then their bandwidth and their IP address is shared. There is also some other applications. So if you go, for example, on the App Store, there is this, I think it's called pwn.app, which offers different types of services, including one which is share your bandwidth, which sounds attractive because you can get money out of your own service plan. So you can make a few dollars if you, rent the access to your mobile device or to your browser or a fixed PC. And of course, that means that other people will be able to relay traffic through your device, and you make a few bucks, and of course, those providers make a lot more. There is also some proxyware that is, or at least some proxy that is deployed through exploits and vulnerabilities, so I won't go into that level of detail here. But for the most part, for those that claim to be, let's say, reputable, or at least reputable, legitimate proxy providers, they will try to have something like this where they have some form of consent, even though it's very hard to check. And when we, excuse me, when we talk about DDoS, the reason why, so we are starting to see much more proxy, so residential proxy specifically involved in DDoS. I talked last year about those attacks from this group called No Name. It's the most visible hacktivist group, I would say, at least for those that are targeting European interests especially, but not exclusively. They have been extremely active in terms of the number of attacks that they launch. They're not always successful attacks, but they launch a lot of them. And we have been monitoring them for a few years. What's noteworthy, of course, is that they claim the attacks that are successful, and also they have been making fun of the European cybersecurity community, which I take no offense in. And they make the claim, I mean, they basically say that basically people are surprised that the attack traffic is not coming from Russia, it is coming from Europe, right? So this is one of the key things that they can do. They can bypass geo-IP restrictions. They can have traffic appear from where they want the traffic to appear, close to the target. And just to make the point, so this is for one of the proxy providers where you can select the country, the region, the city where you want to have your traffic originate from, or at least be relayed from. So the traditional thinking in having policies that will block particular countries is really not relevant, at least not for application layer DDoS. Because you can see here, I made the exercise, and I will show you the result in the next slide, which is that in 15 minutes, I set up an account on this one, paying in cryptocurrency. I selected Brittany, because I like Brittany, and then relaying traffic to my web server to see how many IPs from Brittany can I get. And it turns out that in 5 minutes with $8, I could get a couple of hundreds of IP addresses from completely legitimate residential IP addresses from our service providers in France. Of course, the users are not suspecting that this is happening. In this case, the hit rate was actually pretty good. So it was almost 100% from France, most of them from Brittany, so there's always a bit of uncertainty on the actual geolocation, but all of them coming from unsuspecting residential broadband users. So this is something that anybody can do, almost anonymously, so you can use cryptocurrency again, and this is what those groups like No Name are using, so some version of that, but where they can really address this type of traffic. So I'll close here by just explaining a bit what can we do about this. We really see that geo-blocking restriction on application layer DDoS is really becoming a thing of the past. It's not effective anymore. What we have been doing with our customers using Deepfield as a DDoS protection solution, where we leverage the IP routers on the network, is that we use the routers to protect even for this type of application layer HTTPS encrypted traffic that is hitting web servers. We can actually block that on the routers. So we can provide layer 7 awareness for this type of attacks without having to divert to expensive scrubbers. And we can really protect those websites from these low and slow and proxy-related attacks. So that's what we've been doing, and we hope to do more of it. So I'll close here, and happy to take any questions.